She sat quietly in the defendant's chair, the weight of her medals contrasting the heaviness in the courtroom. Former SEAL Lieutenant Commander River Calloway faced her accusers without flinching. The judge's voice dripped with contempt as he stared down at her. "You're not special, Commander. You're just weak." What happened next silenced the entire room. She rose slowly, leaned into the microphone, and whispered two words that made hardened military officers freeze in disbelief. "From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, consider subscribing for more untold military stories that challenge what we think we know about courage and command." The Naval Station Norfolk military courtroom held an unsettling sterility, its wood paneling and polished brass fixtures failing to provide warmth to the proceedings within. Lieutenant Commander River Calloway sat with perfect posture in her dress blues, ribbons, and medals, creating a constellation of honor. Her across her chest, her hands rested on the table before her, right thumb occasionally tracing a jagged scar that ran across her left palm, a private ritual unnoticed by anyone else in the room. The court-martial had been underway for 2 days already. The prosecution's evidence played across screens mounted throughout the chamber. Satellite footage showing Operation Blackfish unfolding in grayscale precision. Thermal signatures moved through a compound. Comms chatter providing clinical narration to the aborted mission. The operation, a covert extraction in a location still deemed classified, had gone sideways when Calloway refused a direct order to proceed despite intelligence suggesting civilians in the target zone. Colonel Augustine Hargrove, a career military prosecutor with salt and pepper hair and a perpetual look of disappointment, stood at the center of the courtroom. His dress uniform bore nearly as many decorations as Calloway's, though his had been earned largely behind desks rather than in combat zones. He gestured to the technician who played the damning radio transmissions. "Mantis Actual, you are cleared hot. Execute. Execute." Calloway's voice came through next, steady despite the circumstances. "Negative command. Cannot comply. Request immediate stand-down." "That is a direct order, Mantis. Execute now." "Sir, with respect, I cannot." The assembled officers and officials shifted in their seats, a ripple of discomfort moving through the gallery. In the front row sat Admiral Thaddeus Northcraft, his weathered face a mask of neutrality that seemed out of place for what should have been a straightforward disciplinary hearing. His eyes, however, never left Calloway's face, studying her with an intensity that suggested deeper currents beneath the surface. Major Alla Winfield, Calloway's defense counsel, stood to object to the characterization of the evidence. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform pressed to perfection. The defense maintains that Commander Calloway acted within her authority as team leader when faced with actionable intelligence regarding civilian presence. The rules of engagement clearly state, the rules of engagement do not supersede a direct order from command during an active operation. Major interrupted Judge Advocate General Harrison Blake from his position on the bench. His voice carried the certainty of someone used to being the final authority in any room. "Your Honor, if I may," Winfield continued undeterred. "We request access to Commander Calloway's complete service record, including her deployments with previous units. Her decision-making process can only be fully understood within the context of her extensive operational experience." Blake's eyes narrowed slightly. "Request denied. Commander Calloway's previous deployments are not relevant to her refusal to obey orders on April 18th. The court will focus solely on the matter at hand." Calloway's expression remained unchanged, though something flickered in her eyes momentarily. From her position at the defendant's table, she noticed a young aide in civilian attire taking detailed notes in the back row. When their eyes met briefly, there was a flash of recognition, though Calloway couldn't place where she might have seen the woman before. The first day's proceedings concluded with testimony from Calloway's commanding officer, who described her as exemplary in most respects, but noted a troubling pattern of questioning orders in recent months. As the courtroom began to clear, Calloway watched Admiral Northcraft exchange hushed words with a civilian she didn't recognize before both men exited through a side door rather than the main entrance. Winfield gathered her papers, frustration evident in her movements. "They're boxing us in, Commander. Without access to your full service record, it's going to be difficult to establish context for your decision." "It wouldn't make a difference," Calloway replied, her voice low. "Some things aren't in those records anyway." Winfield gave her a curious look. "Care to elaborate on that, Commander?" "No." Calloway stood, adjusting her uniform. "Some ghosts should stay buried, Major." The second day proceeded much as the first, with technical experts testifying about the operational parameters and intelligence assessments preceding the mission. Calloway listened attentively, but offered little reaction to even the most damning testimony. Only when a junior intelligence officer mentioned potential civilian presence, with moderate confidence, did she lean forward slightly, eyes fixed on the young man, as he admitted under cross-examination that this warning had been included in the pre-mission briefing packet. By day 3, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted noticeably. Where there had been professional detachment, there was now an almost palpable hostility directed toward Calloway. Word had spread through the officer corps about the proceedings, and several new faces appeared in the gallery. Senior officers whose presence seemed designed to send a message. Judge Blake began the day by addressing pending motions. The defense's request to call character witnesses from Commander Calloway's former unit is denied due to operational security concerns. Additionally, the court will accept into evidence the psychological evaluation conducted by Captain Warren of Naval Medical Command. Winfield rose immediately. "Your Honor, that evaluation was conducted without proper notice to defense counsel, and the findings directly contradict Commander Calloway's regular psychological assessments over her 15-year career. The evaluation was ordered as part of this proceeding and is therefore admissible," Blake stated firmly. "Colonel Hargrove, you may proceed." Hargrove approached the bench with a manila folder. "The prosecution calls Commander Ravier Calloway to the stand." Calloway moved with fluid precision to the witness stand, took the oath with unwavering eye contact, and sat with the same perfect posture she'd maintained throughout the proceedings. If she was concerned about facing direct examination, it didn't show in her demeanor. Hargrove began with standard questions about her training, deployment history, and command experience. His approach was methodical, establishing her expertise before beginning to undermine it. When he shifted to Operation Blackfish, his tone hardened. "Commander Calloway, would you describe yourself as risk-averse?" "I would describe myself as risk-appropriate, Colonel," she answered evenly. "And yet Captain Warren's evaluation suggests you suffer from, and I quote, decision paralysis when faced with high-stakes operational choices. Would you say that's accurate?" "I would not." Hargrove paced slowly before the witness stand. "Your team was specifically selected for this extraction because of the complexity and risk involved. Did you feel overwhelmed by the responsibility?" "No," Calloway replied. "My team was fully prepared for the operational parameters as briefed." "Then please explain to the court why, when given a direct order to proceed, you suddenly determined you knew better than your entire chain of command." Calloway took a measured breath before responding. The operational landscape changed. New intelligence suggested civilian presence in the target building. Proceeding would have violated both ROE and the Geneva Convention. "Would you say your female sensibilities made you hesitate when men's lives were on the line?" Hargrove asked, his tone deliberately provocative. The courtroom tensed. Several officers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. "Objection." Winfield was on her feet immediately. "That question is inappropriate, irrelevant, and blatantly sexist." "I'll allow it," Blake ruled, surprising even Hargrove. "The commander's decision-making process is central to these proceedings." Calloway's expression remained unreadable, though something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "My sensibilities have kept teams alive through 3 wars, Colonel. My gender has never been relevant to my effectiveness, and it wasn't relevant that night. And yet you froze when decisive action was required." Hargrove pressed. "I made a tactical decision based on new intelligence." "That's not freezing, Colonel. That's leading." The questioning continued for nearly 2 hours, growing increasingly personal and pointed. When Calloway attempted to reference a previous operation came Silverfish as precedent for her decision-making process, Blake immediately cut her off. That operation is not relevant to these proceedings and is outside the scope of this court-martial, he declared firmly. With respect, Your Honor, Calloway countered. The tactical similarities between Silverfish and Blackfish directly informed my assessment of the situation. The court has ruled, Commander, Blake said sharply. Move on, Colonel Hargrove. As the day's proceedings neared their conclusion, Hargrove circled back to the psychological evaluation. Commander, if not decision paralysis, how would you characterize your refusal to follow orders that night? Moral clarity, Calloway replied without hesitation. Moral clarity, Hargrove repeated skeptically. Above the strategic objectives of your mission, above the orders of your superiors, above the operational security concerns that you were not privy to. Some lines shouldn't be crossed, Colonel, regardless of who gives the order. As Calloway stepped down from the witness stand, Blake looked directly at her, his expression one of barely concealed contempt. This court has seen nothing to suggest you are anything special, Commander, he stated for the record. You're not exceptional. You're exceptionally weak, a liability to the brave men and women who serve alongside you. The gallery watched in uncomfortable silence. In the back row, a Pentagon official Calloway hadn't noticed before whispered urgently into a secure phone, eyes fixed on the proceedings. As she returned to her seat beside Winfield, Calloway noticed something she hadn't seen before. On Blake's desk, partially obscured by case files, sat a manila folder marked Eyes Only with a familiar insignia embossed in the corner. It was a symbol she hadn't seen in years, one that shouldn't have been there at all. For the first time since the court-martial began, Ravier Calloway felt something other than resigned determination. As recognition flashed across her features, she straightened her shoulders and met Blake's gaze directly. The judge's expression flickered momentarily, uncertainty replacing condescension as he recognized something had shifted in the dynamic between them. Court is adjourned until 900 tomorrow, Blake announced, gathering his materials with unusual haste, at which time this tribunal will render its verdict. As the courtroom cleared, Winfield leaned close to her client. What just happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Calloway watched Blake exit through his private door, the folder tucked securely under his arm. Not yet, she replied quietly. But tomorrow, everyone else will. Dawn broke over Naval Station Norfolk with a clarity that belied the tension permeating the base. By 0800, the corridor outside Courtroom 3 had filled with officers and officials who hadn't been present for the previous day's proceedings. Whispers circulated among the assembled brass, conversations falling silent whenever Calloway or her counsel approached. Revere Calloway had arrived earlier than required, wearing her dress blues with meticulous precision. She sat alone in a side chamber, reviewing her service record one final time. The official version, anyway, the one that omitted years of her career under the simple designation special assignment. Major Winfield entered, carrying her briefcase in a concerned expression. Commander, something strange is happening. Admiral Kendrick just arrived with her staff. The Chief of Naval Operations sent a representative. There's someone here from the Secretary of Defense's office. Calloway looked up from her papers, expression unreadable. Are you surprised? Should I be? Winfield asked, studying her client carefully. You know something I don't. Many things, Calloway confirmed, closing the folder before her. And after. Today, so will Judge Blake. When they entered the courtroom at precisely 0855, the transformation was immediately apparent. The gallery had filled with senior officers, intelligence officials, and civilians whose bearing marked them as more than casual observers. Admiral Northcraftoff sat in the front row again, but now accompanied by two stern-faced men in dark suits who surveyed the room with practiced vigilance. Most notably, the young aide Calloway had noticed on the first day, now sat directly behind the prosecution table, her attention fixed on Calloway with an intensity that suggested professional assessment rather than casual interest. At 0900 sharp, Judge Blake entered and the courtroom rose. If he was surprised by the expanded audience, his expression didn't betray it, though his eyes lingered momentarily on the higher brass in attendance. "This court-martial is now in session," he announced, taking his seat. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, this court is prepared to render judgment in the matter of the United States Navy versus Lieutenant Commander Ravir Callaway on charges of insubordination, dereliction of duty, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Blake shuffled papers before him, organizing his thoughts. Before the verdict is read, military justice provides the defendant an opportunity for final statement. "Commander Callaway, do you wish to address this court?" Winfield touched her client's arm lightly, a silent question, but Callaway had already made her decision. She stood, adjusting her uniform jacket, and moved toward the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, I request permission to identify myself properly for the record." Blake sighed impatiently. "Your name and rank are already established, Commander." "Not all of it, sir," Callaway replied, her voice carrying a new edge. "May I approach?" Blake gestured his assent, and Callaway moved forward to the microphone positioned before the bench. For a moment, she stood silently, her posture shifting subtly. Something predatory awakened in her bearing, a quality that had been carefully concealed throughout the proceedings until now. She leaned toward the microphone and spoke just above a whisper. "Obsidian dusk." The reaction was immediate and electric. A colonel in the third row dropped his pen, the metallic clatter cutting through the sudden silence. The Pentagon aide Callaway had noticed earlier stood abruptly. Admiral Northcraft's face drained of color, his composure cracking for the first time. Blake, confused by the reaction rippling through his courtroom, frowned deeply. "What did you say?" Callaway repeated it, her voice stronger this time. "Obsidian Dusk, November 2017 through March 2020. Task Force 88. The courtroom erupted in hushed, urgent conversations. Several officers were already on their phones, speaking in clipped coded phrases. Blake banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order in a courtroom that was rapidly slipping beyond his control. "This court will have order," he insisted, raising his voice. "Whatever game you're playing, Commander." He was interrupted by a civilian in a dark suit who approached the bench with purposeful strides. The man leaned close to Blake and spoke quietly, handing him a secure phone. Blake's expression transformed in real time, confusion giving way to shock, then to something approaching fear as he listened to whoever was on the other end. "This court will recess for 1 hour," he announced, his voice unsteady. "All present will remain in the building." As Blake hastily exited through his chamber's door, the courtroom dissolved into controlled chaos. Officers formed tight clusters, speaking in low tones. The two men who had accompanied Admiral Northcraft moved swiftly to secure the room's exits, politely but firmly turning away curious personnel who had been drawn by the commotion. Northcraft himself approached Callaway directly, ignoring protocol. Instead of the anger or indignation one might expect, there was something like reverence in his eyes. He offered a subtle nod of respect before speaking. "Commander, it's been a long time." 3 years, 2 months, Admiral," Callaway replied evenly. "We thought you were dead," he said quietly. "Some days I was," she answered, then turned away as Winfield approached, bewilderment evident in her expression. "What just happened?" the defense counsel demanded when they were seated at the defense table. "They remembered who I am," Callaway replied simply. In the ante-room where they waited during the recess, Callaway stood at the window, watching the frantic movement across the base. Official vehicles moved with purpose between buildings. Security personnel had materialized around the perimeter of the courthouse. "You owe me an explanation," Winfield said finally, breaking the tense silence. "I can't defend you properly if I don't understand what's happening." Callaway turned from the window, studying her lawyer carefully. "How's your clearance, Major?" "TSCI with Yankee White," Winfield replied, referring to the highest levels of security clearance available. "I've defended JSOC operators before." "JSOC?" Callaway repeated with the faintest hint of a smile. 3 years ago, I commanded a unit that didn't exist. We handled operations that couldn't happen, the ones that even JC wouldn't touch. Obsidian dusk, Winfield said, understanding beginning to dawn. Yes, we were a ghost unit major. On paper, I was assigned to training roles at various installations. In reality, my team operated in places where American forces couldn't officially go, doing things that needed to be done, but could never be acknowledged. Winfield processed this information carefully. What happened to your team? Calloway's expression hardened. Our last mission went catastrophically wrong. Intelligence failure. We were sent into a situation with faulty information against my recommendation. My entire team was killed. I was the only survivor, barely. She unconsciously touched her side, where Winfield now realized a significant injury must have occurred. I was medically retired on paper, then quietly reactivated 6 months later under my original SEAL designation. The unit was officially listed as decommissioned, which is a convenient way of saying it never existed in the first place. And Blake, Winfield asked, what's his connection? Blake was part of the chain that authorized that final mission despite red flags in the intelligence, Calloway said, her voice hardening. He was a captain then, serving as legal counsel to the oversight committee that approved our operations. He signed off on the mission parameters, knowing the intelligence was questionable. And now he's about to face something he never expected. Winfield said the truth, Calloway replied. Accountability, Winfield corrected. When court reconvened exactly 1 hour later, the transformation was complete. Blake was no longer present at the bench. In his place sat Admiral Lyra Kendrick, a legendary figure in naval intelligence circles, whose presence sent a clear message about the gravity of the situation. New faces occupied the prosecution table. Colonel Hargrove had been replaced by a civilian lawyer flanked by military personnel, whose insignia identified them as JAG Corps, but attached to naval intelligence. The gallery had been cleared of all but the highest-ranking observers and those with direct involvement in the proceedings. This tribunal is now in session, Admiral Kendrick announced, her authoritative voice requiring no gavel to command attention. In light of newly accessible classified information, this court-martial is hereby dissolved by direct order of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All records of these proceedings are classified top secret effective immediately. She turned her attention directly to Calloway. Commander, please approach. Calloway moved forward with military precision. Kendrick descended from the bench and met her halfway. An unprecedented break with court protocol that signified something momentous to all present. From a leather portfolio, Kendrick withdrew Calloway's sidearm, ceremonially returning it to her. The symbolic restoration of trust and authority. Commander Calloway, on behalf of the United States Navy, I extend our deepest apologies for this misunderstanding, Kendrick said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hushed courtroom. Your service record has been amended to accurately reflect your actions during Operation Blackfish, which are now recognized as consistent with the highest traditions of naval service. The revelation continued to unfold through carefully worded statements as Kendrick addressed the reduced audience. Without explicitly confirming classified details, she made it clear that Calloway was not merely a SEAL, but had commanded Obsidian Dusk, a specialized unit whose operations remained among the most closely guarded secrets in military history. Commander Calloway's refusal to follow orders during Operation Blackfish was not, as characterized by the original prosecution, an act of weakness or indecision, Kendrick explained. Based on her unique operational experience, she recognized signatures matching a previous operation with catastrophic outcomes. She wasn't disobeying. She was preventing a recurrence of circumstances that had previously resulted in American casualties. A junior officer approached with a folder, which Kendrick reviewed briefly before continuing. Additionally, this court has received documentation indicating that former Judge Advocate Blake had undisclosed conflicts of interest in this case, having been involved in the authorization chain for previous operations relevant to Commander Calloway's decision-making process. Calloway remained at attention, her expression neutral despite the vindication unfolding around her. Only those who knew her well might have detected the slight relaxation of her shoulders as years of carried weight began to lift. As Admiral Kendrick concluded the proceedings, she addressed Calloway once more. "You are released from these proceedings, Commander. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow for reassignment." When the courtroom had cleared, Winfield approached her client. "Reassignment? After all this?" Calloway gathered her papers slowly. "Some ghosts don't stay buried, Major. Sometimes they come back with a purpose." Through the window, she watched as Judge Blake was escorted to a waiting vehicle by 2 naval security officers. His career effectively over. His reputation destroyed by the truth he had tried to suppress. "Will you continue serving?" Winfield asked quietly. Calloway's gaze remained fixed on the departing vehicle. "That depends on what Admiral Kendrick has in mind tomorrow," she answered. "Some missions can only be carried out by ghosts." Admiral Lyra Kendrick's office occupied the top floor of Naval Intelligence Headquarters, its windows offering a commanding view of the base and harbor beyond. At precisely 0800, Ravia Calloway stood before the Admiral's desk once again in her immaculate dress blues. The morning light caught the polished surfaces of her medals, casting small rainbows across the wood-paneled walls. "At ease, Commander," Kendrick said, looking up from a file spread before her. Unlike yesterday's formal proceedings, today her tone carried a note of genuine respect. "Please sit." Calloway took the offered chair, her posture remaining military precise despite the relaxed command. Between them lay a leather portfolio stamped with classification, so high that most naval officers would never know they existed. "I've spent the night reviewing your complete service record," Kendrick began, tapping the portfolio. "The real one. 15 years of exemplary service, the last 3 of which officially never happened." "That was my understanding," Admiral Calloway replied evenly. "Until yesterday." Kendrick leaned back in her chair. "Your decision to invoke Obsidian Dusk has created quite the ripple effect throughout the chain of command. The Secretary of the Navy personally contacted me at midnight." Calloway remained silent, waiting. "Let's be clear about what happened 3 years ago," Kendrick continued. "Operation Silverfish. Your team was inserted into territory where we had no official presence based on intelligence that suggested an imminent attack on U.S. interests. That intelligence was incomplete at best, deliberately misleading at worst. My team was ambushed within 20 minutes of insertion," Calloway stated flatly. "The intelligence was compromised. I recommended abort 3 times during the planning phase and were overruled by the Oversight Committee, which included then Captain Blake," Kendrick confirmed, closing the file. "All 7 of your team members were killed. You sustained critical injuries, but managed to complete exfiltration alone. I didn't complete the mission parameters," Calloway noted. "The target escaped." "The mission was compromised from the start," Kendrick replied sharply. "You're the only reason we didn't lose 8 operators that night instead of 7. A weighted silence filled the office. Through the window, ships moved across the harbor, continuing their assignments, as they had every day before, unaware of the classified history being reconciled in this room. Fast forward to Operation Blackfish last month. Kendrick continued, "You recognize similarities in the intelligence pattern, the same signatures that preceded Silverfish. Rather than sending your new team into another potential ambush, you refused the order and was court-martialed for it," Calloway concluded. "By the same legal officer who had helped authorize the original compromised mission," Kendrick added. "Blake had every reason to want your concerns discredited and your career destroyed. It would have protected him from accountability for Silverfish." Kendrick stood, moving to the window. "What he didn't count on was you using Obsidian Dusk as a defense. That call sign was supposed to be buried forever. Most who knew of its existence believed all members were deceased, which was convenient for certain parties," Calloway observed. "Indeed." Kendrick turned back to face her. "Commander, I've been authorized to offer you several options regarding your future with the Navy." She returned to her desk and opened a drawer, withdrawing a sealed envelope. "First option, honorable discharge with full pension and benefits. Effective immediately. Your service record would be amended to reflect appropriate commendations, though the specifics of your operations would remain classified." Calloway received the envelope without opening it, waiting for the alternatives. Second option, Kendrick continued, producing another folder. Reassignment to Naval Special Warfare Development Group as a tactics and strategy instructor. Your experience would be invaluable to the next generation of operators without requiring you to return to field operations. And the third option? Calloway asked, sensing there was more. Kendrick hesitated, then pulled a final folder from her desk. Unlike the others, this one bore no markings, not even a classification level. Reinstatement to active operational status under direct Pentagon authority. A new unit commander, one with full awareness of past mistakes and safeguards to prevent their recurrence. Calloway's expression remained neutral, but her eyes fixed on the unmarked folder. Who would have oversight? I would, Kendrick replied simply, directly. No committees, no layers of deniability, just clear chains of accountability straight to the top. Calloway considered the three options before her. May I have time to consider? Of course. Kendrick glanced at her watch. I have a meeting at the Pentagon this afternoon. I'll need your decision by 0900 tomorrow. As Calloway rose to leave, Kendrick added, one more thing, Commander. Judge Blake has submitted his resignation effective immediately. The investigation into his conduct regarding Silverfish and subsequent events is ongoing. Will it be made public? Calloway asked. No, Kendrick replied. But those who need to know will be informed of the findings. His career is over one way or another. Calloway nodded once, then departed with the three options tucked under her arm, her decision already forming in her mind. The cemetery at Arlington carried a solemn beauty in the late afternoon light. River Calloway moved between the perfectly aligned headstones with practiced familiarity, navigating to a section where newer markers reflected more recent sacrifices. She wore civilian clothes now, simple and unassuming, though her bearing still marked her as military. She stopped before a row of 7 headstones, each bearing different dates and locations of death. To anyone reviewing the cemetery records, these men had died in training accidents or routine deployments across different years and theaters of operation. Nothing connected them in the official record. Calloway knew better. These were her men, her team, the ghosts of Obsidian Dusk. From her pocket, she withdrew 7 small stones she had collected from the beach that morning. One by one, she placed a stone atop each headstone, a team ritual they had performed on deployments when passing fallen comrades from other units. The stones were both commemoration and promise. I remember I carry you with me. Thought I might find you here, came a voice from behind her. Admiral Kendrick approached, also in civilian attire. Despite the informal setting, Calloway instinctively straightened her posture. At ease, Commander. This isn't an official visit. Kendrick moved beside her, surveying the row of headstones. Petty Officer Marcus Donovan, Chief Elijah Talbot, Lieutenant Nadir Corey. All listed as separate incidents. But they died together, Calloway said quietly. On my watch. Under your command, Kendrick corrected. But not due to your decisions. That distinction matters. They stood in silence for a moment, paying respects in their own ways. A gentle breeze stirred the trees lining the cemetery paths, creating a soft, rustling backdrop to their conversation. Have you decided? Kendrick finally asked, nodding toward the papers Calloway held. I have. And Calloway turned to face the Admiral directly. I'll take the third option, but I have conditions. I'm listening, Kendrick replied. I select my own team. No interference in personnel choices, granted within security parameters. I maintain direct communication with you at all times. No intermediaries who might filter or manipulate intelligence. Kendrick nodded. That's why I was selected for oversight. And finally, Calloway continued, I want the families of these men to receive the full benefits they deserve. Not the cover story benefits, but everything they would be entitled to if the true nature of their service were known. Kendrick considered this request, clearly weighing operational security against moral obligation. I can't guarantee medals or public recognition, but I can ensure their families are properly compensated, financial security, educational benefits for their children, the full package. That's acceptable, Calloway agreed, returning her attention to the headstones. They deserve better than they got. Yes, Kendrick acknowledged solemnly. That's why we need you back. Not everyone at the top is corrupt, Commander. Some of us remember what honor means. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the cemetery grounds, Calloway made her decision final by handing the signed reinstatement papers to Kendrick. What do we call this new unit? She asked. Since Obsidian Dusk is now compromised. That's your first assignment, Kendrick replied with a slight smile. Choose a name no one will remember until they need to. With a respectful nod toward the fallen, both women turned to leave. As they walked through the precise rows of marble markers, Calloway felt a weight shift within her. The burden of survival remained, but it now shared space with purpose, with the possibility of ensuring her team's sacrifice led to something better. When do I start? She asked as they reached the cemetery gates. You already have, Kendrick answered. Your new credentials and facility access will be active by morning. Your first intelligence briefing is scheduled for 0700. Any particular focus I should be aware of? Yes, Kendrick said, her expression growing serious. We have reason to believe the intelligence compromise that led to Silverfish wasn't an isolated incident. Someone deliberately fed false information that sent your team into an ambush. Calloway stopped walking, processing this confirmation of suspicions she had carried for 3 years. You're saying there's a domestic component to the operation. I'm saying your new mission has 2 objectives, Kendrick clarified. External threats, yes, but also identifying whoever was responsible for Silverfish. We clean our own house first. As they parted ways at the cemetery entrance, Calloway felt something she hadn't experienced since before the ambush. Certainty of purpose. The next morning, Commander River Calloway entered a nondescript office building in Quantico. Her new credentials granted her access to a secure elevator that descended deeper than the building's official blueprint suggested. When the doors opened, she found herself in a state-of-the-art operations center where 5 people waited, each standing as she entered. Commander on deck, announced a familiar voice. It belonged to the young aide Calloway had noticed in the courtroom, now dressed in tactical gear rather than civilian attire. At ease, Calloway replied automatically, surveying the room and the personnel. Let's start with introductions. Lieutenant Vivian Marquez, Signals Intelligence, the former aide began. I served with Chief Talbot before his assignment to Obsidian Dusk. It's an honor to work with you, Commander. One by one, the others introduced themselves, each bringing specialized skills, and each connected in some way to her former team. They had been selected not just for their abilities, but for their personal investment in the mission ahead. Our unit designation? Asked the tactical specialist, a former Force Recon Marine. Calloway thought of the unmarked graves, the stones placed in remembrance, and the mission now before them. Echo Vigil, she decided, because we stand watch for those who no longer can. As the team briefed her on their first potential operation, Calloway felt her fallen teammates present in spirit, guiding this new beginning. The wheels of accountability had begun turning. Blake's career was over, but he was merely the first thread in a larger conspiracy she now had the authority and resources to unravel. Justice would come, not in a courtroom with public vindication, but in the shadows where her team had always operated best. For Calloway and her new unit, the mission was clear. Honor the fallen by protecting the living and holding accountable those who had betrayed both. The camera pulls back, revealing the operation center in full. With Calloway at its center, a commander reborn, a ghost returning with purpose, the last survivor becoming the first to lead a new chapter in a story that was far from over. The graves at Arlington stood as silent testament to sacrifices most would never know about. But now those sacrifices would have meaning through the continued service of those who remembered. Subscribe to my channel, The Ordinary Heroes.